we are officially recording, and this will work much like the first session. So if you were not with us, I am Teresa Gibson, and I will be manning the chat. So if you have any questions or technical problems, feel free to reach out to me. And then our host facilitators today are Manly Midget and Judy Day, and I will let you all get right down to scientific inquiry.
And the good news is I'm in my classroom at Meredith today, so I'm actually in a real classroom. Okay, science inquiry. I had mentioned earlier when we were looking at our goals and objectives that about inquiry, and what I like to do is look at it now. And so as I'm going over these three different types of inquiry, I want you to think, the teachers especially, to think about the activities they do in the classroom throughout the year and see which category they fall into. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Okay, if you teach pre-K, which probably none of you do since the science fair and the workshop's really geared for grades 3 through 12, if you taught pre-K, you would know that the students have the sand play and the water play and some things like that. It's not always just play, but that's open inquiry. That's when students have materials, they can choose the question they want to try to solve, and they have to figure out how to explore and answer that question. Now, we don't do a lot of this in school, but guess what? The science fair is open inquiry. The students are going to choose the question that they're going to pursue, and later today, in this session, you'll have a chance to do that yourselves and for homework. And also, the students have to figure out a way to answer the question. They need to know what they need to use and measure and all the steps they need to do and all those things. So that truly is, the science fair is open inquiry. But in school, we don't always do a lot of open inquiry. We do a lot of this kind, structured. And I've seen a lot of chemistry courses in high school that are this way. I see a lot of elementary activities that are this way. And a lot of times we pat ourselves on the back if the students follow the directions and everybody got the same answer. A lot of times, as the teacher, they want to know, what did I get? What was my answer? And there may not be an answer that everybody gets. But structured inquiry, my personal opinion is we do too much of that in school. And we do too many cookbook labs. We give them the question and tell them how to solve the problem. And if we continue to do that, they don't know how to solve a problem. They don't know how to develop a question or come up with a good question sometimes, or testable question, or figure out a way to solve that problem or question. And so, yes, there's a place for structured inquiry in school. And I remember, like I mentioned, I picked on chemistry because when I was the coordinator of science for Wake County for many years, and I worked with all the chemistry teachers as a group. I worked with all the physics teachers as a group, and so on. And a lot of times with the chemistry teachers, I found that a lot of what they did was very structured, and we tried to get them out of some of that. Some of it had to be structured because the students had to learn certain techniques and processes. But we also wanted them to do the next type of inquiry, which is guided inquiry. For our next slide. And in guided inquiry, the teacher might choose the question because you might be limited by the materials you have at school, or the setup or something like that. So a lot of times you choose the question. There's nothing wrong with choosing the question and developing that with the students. That makes it even closer to open, but you can do that. But the students have to design a way to find the answer. It's not the teacher telling them how to answer the question. You might limit their materials they have sometimes because it's what you have. You have what you got. And that will also help you choose the question. But students need to design a way to answer the question. They need to know about variables. And we're going to talk about that later after this activity we're getting ready to do between now and next time. And they're going to talk about even variables that they should control. Yeah, they'll learn about independent variables and dependent variables, or if you prefer, some people call them manipulated variables or something like that, but independent and dependent is fine. And then everything else is controlled. And a lot of times when students design their own answer to a question, they find that there are some variables that they didn't count on, and maybe they didn't control them as closely as they should have. And so our activity will help us do that. So what I'm proposing is that in the future, if you can, try to figure out how to get many of your activities that may be structured inquiry to move into guided inquiry. And I can promise you this, as a teacher, and I've taught first grade, fifth grade, middle school, high, I promise you that if you do more guided inquiry as opposed to structured, you're going to enjoy it more as a teacher too. The students are going to really be turned on. It's going to not just be everybody getting the same answer, and they're going to really learn how to do things and develop some really important science skills. Okay, the next slide. So we're going to do an activity. And now if you were face-to-face, this would be a lot easier. And I know all of you I've been teaching my classes since March virtual, and I know a lot of you have as well. And it's a very difficult thing teaching a lab virtual, and things happen that you don't always expect. And it's very difficult teaching a lab when the students don't have the materials. So what we've done as an example here is we've chosen an activity we're going to do as a lab for inquiry. We think you do have the materials. And also we're going to do another one later for engineering. We think you have those materials as well. And we'll let you know what you need to have in a few minutes. But I usually start, I usually start with this. I show them a bunch of paper towels and I tell them our question. I'll show you our question in a minute. But before I get into the question, I usually ask the students, tell me some reasons that someone would buy one kind of towel over another. Now, try to fight the urge to say what kind of towels mom buys at home, because that's a little bit gender biased to do it that way. And most of the students I used to teach didn't have paper towels at home. They couldn't afford to have paper towels at home. So if someone were to buy paper towels, what are some things they might consider to help them make the decision what kind of towel to buy? Maybe on the chat, you could put some of those up there. We can look at them real quick. Some reasons, things you would use to help you decide what kind of towel to buy. I'm going to look at the chat real quick too. Ah, good, we're coming in. Now, it's funny, teachers come up with cost a lot. The students don't usually think of that one until about last. Now, I see a quality, and we might have to say, what is quality? Somebody says the size of the roll. Ah, the commercial. The advertisement might sway us. Now, somebody mentioned absorption, which is important. Oh, the brand. Maybe they got experience with a certain brand. Somebody mentioned experience. The advertisements, how large. So we got a lot of good thickness, a lot of good feedback here from the group. Thank you for doing that.
I like the one that says the one that grandma uses.
Yeah. Well, it might be the only kind they got at the store. I grew up in a very rural area of North Carolina, and they didn't have but one kind of anything at the store. So if they got paper towels and we had the money to buy them, it would be one kind is what you'd have, whatever the store brand was. But now, students don't usually think of cost. A lot of you did. And a lot of you, the students will tell them their parents. It tickles me. They'll say, we got one kind of paper towel we use all the time. It's not very good. But when company comes, we pull out this one that matches the kitchen or something. So they got one they kind of hold back unless they got company. But they mentioned, I don't think you mentioned how good they tear off the roll. Sometimes I hate to pull one and tears in pieces and the roll spinning around and dumping them on the countertop. So you do want them to tear off. Nobody said that one. A lot of people mentioned the commercials from their experience, high quality based on their previous experience with other paper towels. Maybe the color, but people mentioned absorbency. And so the problem we're going to look at today is absorbency. The question is going to relate to that. And so you might want to, if you typically use the paper towel to clean up spills or to wipe the cabinets up or whatever, or to clean up after you've eaten, you might want a paper towel that's very absorbent. Now, I usually ask the students to give me a definition of absorbency because some students might not know what that means. And the definition they usually give me is how much it will soak up. So how much liquid will that paper towel soak up? And it might be that they spilled a soft drink or water or whatever, gravy, I don't know, on the tabletop, and they want to soak it up. So we're going to look at that today. We can go to the next slide. And I want you to pay particular attention to the question, because a very important part of this lab is holding to the question, not changing the question. And I want you to see that sometimes students do things that actually they get away from the question and they're actually answering a different question. If we were face-to-face, this is a little easier because I can jump to group even faster than I could if we did breakouts. And we're not going to do breakouts with 63 people today. But with breakouts in the classroom of 25 to 30 students, I can quickly get from group to group and find out what they're doing and make sure they stay on the question. Now, part of the strategy here is not to tell the students what to do. I've given them the question. They've got to come up with how to solve the question. But I do want to hear what their plan is. And so usually after they look at this, and we have a material manager, and I give them jobs. One person is going to be the data recorder, and one person is going to be the material manager, and they go get the stuff and know where it is so they can put it right back. And if it's a third person in the group, there might be the director or the reporter. They can report the data. One person is going to record it. They all have to have the data, but one can be recording it, and one can report it to the whole big group, and one can return the materials. So that's something you do if you're face-to-face. And ordinarily, I choose 3 kinds of towels. I choose Bounty or something like that, a good towel. I choose a medium price brand, and I choose a very inexpensive brand. I try to get all 2-ply towels if I can. And also, if a towel, I try to get towels that are not Select-A-Size. Because if they're doing the experiment and somebody has a towel that's a regular size, and another group has the Select-A-Size, one of them which is smaller, then it's almost a disadvantage having the towels so different in size. So I usually tell, if they have Select-A-Size, I tell them to consider 2 Select-A-Size towels a regular towel. So keep that in mind. Now, since we're not face-to-face, I'm not expecting you to go get 3 kinds of towels. But in the classroom, face-to-face, every group would have 1 towel, only 1, not a whole roll, just 1. They need to not get it wet until they want to get it wet. 1 towel of each type. Now, at home, you've got the kind of towels, whatever you have. There are 2 kinds of towels I don't want you to use in this activity. One is, I don't want you using like shop towels or anything like shop. They need to be kitchen paper towels. They shouldn't be cloth either. And so they should be just paper towels that you'd use in the kitchen. And I'm going to put one brand off limits, and I hope this is not the one many of you have. It's Viva. We showed that in the picture a minute ago. Viva has a process where they make their towel, and it's so thick, it's almost like a piece of cloth. It's almost unfair to compare it in this experiment. We could do it later if we had more time, but let's say Viva is kind of off limits. You can use anything else. Now, I don't want everybody using Bounty. I'm hoping some of you got the store brand. You might have Scott towels or Sparkle or Brawny or something like that, or some store brand from Walmart, Great Value, I think it's the Walmart one, or something from Sam's Club or wherever. Now, you might want to go next door, keep your distance, and ask your neighbor if you can borrow one of their paper towels if it's a different kind. So you could test more than 1 type. It would be wonderful if you could test 3 types. That's up to you. But we're going to ask you to test 1. Yeah, Bounty does have their name. I noticed somebody had a question. That's one thing about Bounty. They do put their name on their towels. I throw a curve in there sometimes when I buy them. I buy a towel called Bounty Basics. It's a Bounty towel, but it does not live up to the Bounty reputation. And that kind of throws a curve in the plan. But anyway, and if I go to Food Lion, and we have a lot of Food Lions, Food Lion has 2 store brands. They have a regular Food Lion brand, and then they have a premium brand that's a little more expensive. I like to compare those sometimes. So here's your question today, between now and next week. How much water will 1 paper towel of each type hold? Now, I mean a whole paper towel. So don't come up with a plan where you're sticking a paper towel in water and you're measuring how fast the water moves up the towel, like capillary action or something. We didn't say how fast it can absorb water. We're not talking about the one that can absorb the fastest. And a lot of times, if you do that, the whole towel doesn't get wet. So you don't answer this question. You would only say which towel absorbs the fastest, not how much water the towel will absorb or hold. So this is your question. I want you to stick to it. Now, we'll tell you materials in just a minute, but before we do that, when I'm going around the class and I have groups, I ask them to tell me what they're doing. Now, typically, the students have figured out a way to wet the towel, and you'll have to figure that out yourself in a minute with the materials you get. They figure out, they tell me how they're going to wet the towel. And then they tell me how they're going to take it out of wherever it is that's very wet. And they're going to tell me how they're going to measure some water. And a lot of times they'll measure the water that's left behind, and that will tell them what's in the towel. Now, it might sound like I'm telling you there are a lot of ways to do this, but there are two ways that come up in groups. And I'll let one group in the class do this, but I really don't want y'all doing it because I don't have time to go around and talk to all of you. Sometimes a group wants to squeeze the towel. And so I ask them, I'm not trying to tell them what not to do or tell them what to do, but I'll ask them a question. I'll say, okay, if you squeeze the towel, can you squeeze it the same every time? And they usually say no. Okay, if you squeeze the towel, are you squeezing out water that was absorbed? And they go, yes. And that might be their point. They want to measure what they can squeeze out of it. I say, okay, let's suppose you measure what you squeeze out of it in a different cup. Do not let them squeeze it back into the main water that they started with. Now, they're going to measure some amount of water and start with that. It might be in a cup or a pan or something, but they're going to wet the towel there, and they're going to pull the towel out. Do not ask them not to squeeze the towel if they're going to squeeze it back into there. They need to squeeze it where they can catch the water and measure it. And then they'll figure out, they usually figure out on their own, that if they measure what they squeezed out and they knew what they started with, they can subtract and figure out how much is in the towel. Well, then they go, oh, there's that much in the towel, it absorbed that, but it also absorbed what we squeezed out, so they'll add those two numbers back again. So really, they didn't need to squeeze it. Now, another group might want to cut the towel. It's going to really bother them that their towels are the different sizes. But when you go grab a towel to clean up a spill, you grab a whole towel. Sometimes you grab a lot of towels, but we just say you get one. We want to know how much that one towel will absorb. So if you cut the towels, and they usually cut them the size of the smallest one, they've changed the question. And I'll usually ask the group, I'll say, I think you've changed the question. What is the question? And I'll tell you today, to save some time, they usually come up with, oh, we're finding out how much this amount of material will absorb, whatever the dimensions are that we use. So however many square inches or square centimeters the towel is, and they're all the same size because they're controlling that, how much will the material absorb? Well, that's a good question. And the manufacturers would want to know the answer to that. But that's not the question today. The question today is how much will a whole towel absorb? So they need to get them wet. Now, some groups want to use 10, you aren't going to have graduated cylinders, so you might not be able to measure 10 milliliters at a time, but you might do 1 teaspoon at a time or something. And if you measure 1 teaspoon, you'll find that that doesn't wet the whole towel. And then 2 teaspoons, and 3, whatever. It's okay to go ahead and get the towel pretty wet, but you do need to measure how much you're starting with. You want that to be a known. So whatever you decide to start with, some amount of water that you decide, and you're going to wet the towel, it's okay for it to get wet because you're going to pull the towel out and measure what's left in some way. All right, we'll have questions in a minute too. Now, let's go to the next slide with the materials.
Yep.
Oh, wait, that's okay. This is going to tell you what you got to do. So by next week, you got to design your experiment to answer this question. Okay? Then you're going to use the suggested materials, which we're going to tell you in a few minutes what they are. All right? I want you to be precise. Now, here's what I mean by that. If you get a teaspoon, and you're going to measure a teaspoon and put it in your wherever you're going to put the water, and you need to measure a bunch of teaspoons, you need, before you dump the teaspoon in wherever you're dumping it, you need to dip it out of a big bowl or something and wipe the top of it off the edge with something like a ruler or something, because it needs to be a flat, level teaspoon. And then that's 1 teaspoon. And you get another one, wipe it off, that's 2 teaspoons. So let's be as precise as we can. And by the way, we'll send you something. 1 teaspoon is 5 milliliters. I think we tell you that in a minute here. And then that's 1 teaspoon is 5 milliliters. And a tablespoon is 3 teaspoons, which is 15 milliliters. It's good for you to know that. All right, what's next on I got animations here. Okay, next week you're going to also be prepared to share your data. And we'll talk about that. You might do it through the chat and whatever. Your research method with the class. And remember, don't change the question by squeezing or cutting the towels. Okay? Next. If you got a question about your plan, you can ask Judy if you're middle or high, and you can ask me if you're elementary. You got our email addresses there. I'm the elementary, I'm outreach, and Judy's director. So we want you to email your results, the kind of tile you got, and just a short description of the method you used, and then how much water each tile type absorbed. So you got this slide. So you're basically going to give us our, results. The kind of tile, what you did, the amount it absorbed. Send that, elementary people send that to me. Middle and high, send that to Judy. Okay, we can go on. Here are the materials you're going to use. Remember, kitchen paper towels, not shop towels, not Viva. Save the wrapper if you got it. Don't be stressed out if you don't have the wrapper. Enough people will have the wrapper. We can talk about that. I want to talk about follow-up and how to extend this activity further, and I'll do that next week. Okay, I mentioned this earlier, the next one. 1 teaspoon is 5 milliliters. 1 tablespoon is 3 teaspoons, which should be 15. And a quarter cup is 4 tablespoons, which is 60 milliliters. Now, you can use 3 cups the same size. I don't care if they're paper, plastic, ceramic, coffee cups. You can use more than 3, but you'll need, it's nice to have 3 so you can do each tile in a separate one. Keep them apart. You might want a ruler, so you can measure your tiles or use it to wipe off the teaspoons. I suggest you have a square or rectangular pan. Sometimes the students want to pour the water on the tabletop and dry it and soak it up. And they might not have enough water, so they put more water on the tabletop. And they keep up with how much they've done. They wipe it, and then they got to decide is the towel as holding as much as it could. And usually it's not holding as much as it can until it's soaking wet and dripping. Well, then you can't measure what's left on the tabletop. So therefore, I would use some type of pan, whether it's aluminum, pie pan, or glass, or Pyrex, something, to put your water in, wet the towels, and that way water that's left behind can be measured more easily, poured out into a cup or to a teaspoon. You can pour it to a cup and then measure it with the teaspoon. Okay? So, and if you have less than a teaspoon, you're going to have to kind of estimate. We know a teaspoon is 5 milliliters, so you'll have to just kind of guess a little bit, but you'll be able to look and come close. Okay, let's look at the next slide. That's what you got materials. Now, I need to know if you got questions on what you're doing next week. So you can do that through the chat, and we'll try to look at the chat. Oh yeah, Teresa said we're seeing slides. Any more chats? Am I missing some of them? Oh, somebody asked about the time frame. You can do this experiment whenever you want to, but you need to send it to us. Since our next session is Tuesday at 3 o'clock, we don't need to get this at 2:30 next Tuesday. We won't have time to look at it and put things together. I would say by Monday late, anytime by Monday would be a good time to send it to us. So if you'll do your experiment between tonight and next Monday, that would be good. And go ahead and send us, Judy, what she gets, or me, and that'd be good. Okay, let's see what we got. I don't think you're gonna have to know a whole lot. Just use regular tap water. Somebody asked about the element properties of water. Right now, just regular tap water is fine. There's not a specific format. I mean, if you send it to me, it's in Word, or if it's in the body of your email, either one's okay. Somebody asked a question, must I wet the whole towel? Yes, you should wet the whole towel. Otherwise, you don't know how much the whole towel will hold. So wet the whole towel, okay? Does the water temperature measure? I'd say room temperature water or tap temperature, which is a little cooler than room temperature. As long as you do the experiment, it's not going to take you a few minutes. The temperature wouldn't matter a whole lot there. It might matter. That might be another whole experiment to do with water with different temperatures, but we don't want to heat any water up here. We just want it out of the tap. That's a good question. I'm not going to answer that question about the drip. Somebody asked, when should you let it stop dripping? You're going to have to decide. We'll talk about that next week. You're going to have to decide whether you let each towel stop dripping before you move it out of the way and start measuring the water that dripped. I mean, it can drip back into the original container because that's water it's not absorbing. So it can drip, just don't squeeze it back in there. It can drip. You can let it drip till it stops. You can move it out right away. You can let it drip 5 seconds or 10 seconds. You have to decide how you're going to control that variable. I don't know if you're going to ball your towels up or if you're going to fold them, but you do need to answer that question was asked earlier. Do you need to get the whole towel wet? You've got to get that towel soaked wet. And it's okay if it drips. You just got to figure out how to handle the drip. Do we have other questions? All right. Okay, let's go to the next slide now. I'm going to cut the chat out for now and go to the next slide. You're going to see this slide again. These are good questions to ask about inquiry. I used to go to classrooms with principals to observe teachers, and I was trying to get the principal to be a better observer of the teachers. And sometimes they would observe a teacher and they would be they say, that was a great class. The kids knew every answer to every question. And the teacher was asking questions like who, what, when, where, things you memorize. These are better questions because they make children think. So we're going to give you this list of questions. Next week, I'm going to use some of these questions when we ask you about your results. I might email some of you back if you send me data. But send us the data we asked for. This is a good slide. I want you to have it. You might want to make a copy of this slide. It's pretty important. All right, let's go to the next one.
Yeah, they will get a copy of the whole presentation at the end of the day. Will be emailed to them.
Now,
Yeah,
you can start thinking about this slide right here. I'm going to ask you this same question next week. We're going to move this slide to the fourth hour. Let's see, to the third hour, because I'm going to ask you to think about what you currently do now that you could do more like the paper towel lab. I'm not saying you need to do the paper towel lab. We're only doing that because we figured you have paper towels at home. But what could you do differently about the labs and activities you do now to make them more inquiry-based? So let me plant that seed, and we're going to come back to this, and you're going to share your ideas with the class a little bit next week in the third hour.
And
Okay,
then
Judy?
Manley, there's one more question, I think, before you throw it to Judy about
Okay.
equipment. Can additional equipment be used or only what's on the list?
Only what's on the list. Now, somebody might have a balance that will weigh the towels, and that's nice. If you want to do that in addition, if you want to do that again, you could have that data in case you'd like to share that next week. But we'd like for you to use, now if you have a graduated cylinder, I should not say only use what we gave you. I didn't think any of you would have graduated cylinders. But if you have a graduated cylinder to measure the quantity of liquids, that's usually more precise than using teaspoons or tablespoons or measuring spoons. So if you have a way to get hold of a graduated cylinder or something like that, that's really good. Now, I don't know what the person has in mind who asked. They might want to tell us what they have in mind. But we really like you to use what you got. And you can use another device to measure the quantities of liquid if you've got a better one. And you can use as many different kinds of towels as you want. Remember, if you're doing select a size, you need to use 2 of those to count as one regular size towel. Did that get an answer, you think, Teresa?
Yep, I think that was it.
Okay. All right. So
All right, I'm done.
Okay. I'm going to jump in and talk about doing a project again. And I've talked about this a little bit. We have planned in the next 5 sessions coming up that you're actually going to work as if you were going to be doing a project. So you're going to come up with a topic. You're going to think about some of the background research resources you can come up with. It'd be great if you could find a few. And then you're going to develop a testable question. And then you're going to create a research plan. And think of when you're doing that research plan, you're going to need to think about any special safety issues that you have to worry about, or if there are any special permissions. And we're going to be going over these and helping you, we'll be critiquing. We won't know whose they are when we talk about them, but we're going to be talking about, this is one of your homework assignments. We'll talk about that specifically later. but we'll be talking about that at the next session next Tuesday, what you've come up with for your topic and your background research. So anyway, so when you start designing that project, the topic is really, I think, the hardest thing to come up with. Unless you are already really into something and you kind of know, oh yes, I know I'm going to do research on such and such, because this is this turns me on. This is where I'm coming from. A topic is really a noun, and lots of times I'll have students that will give me what they think the topic is, and it's this long sentence. And we're going to shorten that a little bit, and it's really going to be something very simple that maybe you're really interested in animals, but you're specifically interested. I have a Labrador Retriever sleep right beside me, so maybe I'm really interested in the way Labrador Retrievers do something, and I'm going to look that up. But it's short, it's specific. It comes from something that you're really interested in, something, a hobby or a topic or a problem that they have or a question. Maybe an environmental issue that they've read about in the newspaper that they're concerned about. Maybe they have a grandparent that needs assistance in being able to do a task that they want to come up with solving that. But that topic's going to be short. And this is when you start keeping your journal. Now, I'm not going to have you turn in a journal to me, but if you're working with students, if they're working on a research project for your class, and again, it can be only within your class or it can go beyond your class, however you want to structure it, but they need to keep a journal. The real world, researchers have to keep it in something that is written and not something that is computerized paper that they type into and then print out or save, because that can be edited. And again, if it goes back, if you're doing research for your living and coming up with new ideas, you need to be able to document that you're the one who came up with that first. So it's handwritten, and that's up to you. But when you're sitting there and you can't figure out your topic, there is, again, this is when I get into the real love-hate relationship with Science Buddies. The topic wizard can be wonderful for that student that just is sitting there with this blank deer in the headlights looking like, what am I going to do now? Because I don't know. The topic wizard asks, it's in Science Buddies, it asks them specific questions. They answer the questions, and it comes back saying, from your answers, it sounds like you're interested in this, 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 and this, or whatever. And then it elaborates a little bit on that, and then it tells them experiments that go along with that. If they do those experiments are background information. They can do that and then come up with their own question about what they learned, and that's fine. But if they are doing that, it's not their project until they come up with their own question to ask about that. And it needs to have a link in their bibliography to that if that's what they use, if they use an experiment from there. That goes back into research ethics when they say, this is my own independent work. I've come across things through the years. There's one in particular where a girl's changing the experiment is she used Petri dishes instead of beakers. That's not changing the experiment. So, you need to look at that. So going on, let's look a little bit about the background research. Once they come up with that topic, they need to get a broader understanding of that topic or the problem that they're working on. And so that's what they're going to start off with. And then they're going to come across terms that they probably do not understand. And so learning what those terms mean along the way, and any information they can get about that topic that would relate to the problem that they are trying to solve. Also that they want to know a little bit more about why is it important that we learn the answer to this question? What is the answer to that problem? Whether it's something it's going to work the way they thought it was. And references need to be kept when they're doing their bibliography and looking on this background information. If you're in elementary school, if it comes to us, we require a minimum of 3 references for elementary and 5 references for middle and high school. And I have had people say, oh, that's a lot. Well, if you really get into learning about your topic, you get those really quickly. But I will say that we do not want all the references coming from where Google, and you have to be careful about Google. So I encourage them to use Google Scholar if you're going to be using that, because that goes into more of the papers that have been written. You can, if they're going to be doing web searches, then you want to do the .govs and the .edus. When you get into the .coms and .orgs, you can get all kinds of information, some of which is true, some of which is not true. You also need to think about, people that you can use. There are a lot of resources out there. You can have experts in the field that tell you information. If you're doing something about nature, you can go and talk to your wildlife agents. You can, if you're in agriculture, every single county has an ag agent for that county, and they work out of NC State University. They're a wealth of information, and that's a great resource for students to take advantage of. But be careful again, what they're searching for and where they're going. Wikipedia, I've seen that listed so many times, but anybody can put information in Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is another one of those that may or may not be true. So you need to watch what the references come from, where that background research is going, and what they're doing with it.
And Judy, Joanne just dropped a question in the chat about, does the problem have to help society, or can it help me specifically with a problem I have at my house?
It can be either. I really think that the students get the most excited sometimes when it's something that they're solving, a problem that directly relates to them. That's great. And even if it's something that's just a problem that they have at home, it's solving an issue with that, then I would encourage them to think about, if it works for me, it may work for other people as well. So,
each county also has a water conservation specialist.
Right.
It's good to have, in addition to an ag agent. Those come in pretty handy sometimes.
So, okay. So now we're getting down to that testable question. We've got your topic, you've done your background information, and you've got to come up with a question. Now this is going more towards the scientific research, because remember, your engineering is a problem that you have, or that you're trying to solve along the way. So this kind of goes more scientific. And it usually, you're thinking about how can I do something, or what am I going to do, or where, but you've got to come up with what is a fair question, a fair test of that one variable. And this, I think, is one of the hardest things for students to do, because they start changing multiple variables, and then they don't know why something happened, what really affected it. So being able to identify what the potential variables are and how to maintain so they're only changing one of those, then they can design that fair test and decide. And then once they designate that, know what's going on, then if they want to change another variable, they can, but they can only change one at a time. And you also need to do a test that you can measure. You've got to determine, what am I going to use to figure out what is changing, how it's changing, how much it's changing, so that I know if it's legitimate or not. Is this really happening? So a good test question, a good testable question, has to address what the topic is, what is going to be changed or tested, and what is going to be measured along the way. All right, so for next week, you'll have to come up with a topic and a testable question. So we've got a testable question. And this is a worksheet that, I don't know if any of you know Nancy Bray. She hasn't been in the educational circles as much lately. I've known her for many years, though. She had this 4-question strategy that she used with her students. And I've seen various versions of this around multiple places. But this is a quick and easy way of doing it. And this is one of the assignments that you would give to your students. And this would be a grade of coming up with a testable question, just like showing the background research with their bibliography of what they came up with and showing the topic. So let's start off. We have to be able to have our topic at the beginning, and you'll get this sheet, I think, emailed to you, Teresa. But so I like plants. I've been sitting here as we're talking, looking at my tomatoes growing and the rabbits hopping around eating them. So I should do something about how to keep the rabbits out of my plants, but that's not what I chose for this. Anyway, so I'm going back. My topic is plants, and I want to think about, I need to do some brainstorming here. So my first question that I'm brainstorming about is, what materials are readily available for conducting experiments in plants? Now, ordinarily, if we were, since we're running short on time, I'm not going to do the chat window to get responses from you. Since I have it pre-filled out, I'm just going to give us some of the answers. So materials for conducting experiments, I've got to have soil, or if I'm doing hydroponics, something like that to stabilize them. I've got to have light. With photosynthesis, they have to have light and water, so do that. They grow better if they have food or fertilizer. And they have to be within a certain temperature range to be able to grow. Too cold, they freeze, and too hot, they burn up and they don't work. So these are some of the things that I can think about, different factors and different materials that I will need. How does a plant act? All right, so I've been looking at my tomatoes, so I guess that they bear fruit, they grow, they have to have flowers before they get the fruit. I've got grow and flower, that they develop roots, they go up towards the sun. You can come up with all different kinds. They have all those trophisms that we could talk about, depending upon what level of student you were working with. So the third question then is, how can I change the set of the plant materials every time we're going back to our topic, the plant materials that I came up with to affect one of the actions? So I've got my materials that I listed are soil, light, water, food, temperature, and I've got how they act. They grow and they flower. So how can I change one of those? Let me see. I'm going to look at water, and I've got 3 different kinds of water. So I've got filtered water, I've got rainwater, and I've got tap water. They talk about acid rain, and they talk about all the stuff that's in my tap. So my filtered water is kind of like a control for me, because that's not supposed to have much stuff in it, right? And we need to have a control to be able to measure things. So my last question is, how can I measure or describe the response of plants to the change? So that's going to be the change of the type of water I use. So what I'm going to measure is the time that it takes to produce a flower. So that means I have to have all the same kind of plants. And I'm going to be measuring, treating them with different kinds of water. And I'm going to measure the length of time it takes each one of those plants before they produce a flower. Now, I will warn you that when you're doing this, we have seen experiments where students were looking at the effect of different fertilizers, and they had 10 plants in one big pot. And they were saying, oh, I'm looking at how the effect of the fertilizer, but they're only in one pot. So what ends up happening? So you end up having all the fertilizers mixing in together. So for this one, they would all have to be in the same similar kind of pot with the same amount of soil. getting the same amount of light, the same amount of fertilizer. Every member getting back those variables, so you're only changing one variable at a time. And this again is hard for the students to understand. Same kind of seeds from the same package, so everything is the same as possible. And so I'm going to come out with all of this. My testable question then: does filtered water, tap water, or rainwater help plants flower faster? That's my experiment. So if you can come up with a testable question, and it's a good testable question, then you have your experiment right there in front of you. Any questions about how I got there? Okay, I'm not seeing any on there. So everybody's going to have to come up with their own homework assignment. And I was rushing through to get through, and I've got 3 minutes. So I guess I've talked fast enough. Sorry if I started going quickly. But you do have your homework assignments. And again, you'll be sending, if you're elementary teachers, you'll be sending it to Manley. If you're middle or high school, you're going to be sending it to me. We will also be sending you a copy of that topic to question sheet, so you can work on that and then have it for you to be able to use if you want to with your students. So you're going with the activity that Manley talked about. You're going to write up the methods that you use for your paper towel experiment and the data that you received, that you got. So how much was the paper towel, you named the paper towel that you had, what exactly you did in details, and how much water did that paper towel absorb. And then for me, you're going to come up first with a topic. Remember, that's not a whole long couple sentences. It's just, this is my topic. A few words. And then you're going to create a testable question. And you're probably going to pick something that you know something about, so you're not going to have to do a whole lot of background research. I'll skip you that, but you may want to kind of think about what will your students be going to and looking at. If they're able to be in school and go to a media center, that's great. If the library is open back up, then they could go to a library. But if not, then it may be that the only source they have is online. So being able to direct where you would go for getting that information. So this, again, Manley said Monday. I would really love it if you could get it to us early Monday afternoon, so we have a little time to look at it. Earlier is before that doesn't hurt. But if we could get it by maybe 1 or 2 o'clock on Monday, that would be great along the way. So now we've got a couple of minutes, because we said we'd let you go at 4:50, but maybe a minute or two for questions, or letting Teresa wrap things up.
Yeah. So if you want to take a moment to kind of think if you have additional questions for Judy, I just want to thank everybody for coming. And I do, because we will be doing this for 4 more sessions, 4 more 50-minute blocks, I did just drop a quick plus delta feedback form into the chat. And so if you all want to take a moment, there's only 2 questions. What was helpful and what would you like to see in the future sessions? Judy, Manley, and I will meet on Monday of next week to make any changes that we think will be helpful to the people who are in the room with us, who are showing up for our Tuesday sessions. So if you would take just a couple minutes to fill out that form for us. And Judy, it looks like Karen had a question about the testable question.
And you can make that testable question anything you want. Like I said, I really like when I'm working with students to start with the topic, the beginning of the school year, and say, you're going to do a research project in this class. And so talk about what a topic is, and then give them a week or 2 to come up with a topic. And so instead of we're not doing it during our framework of 3 weeks. We're thinking more of the basics, because you're not going to go any further than a research plan with me. You're not going to actually have to do the experiments. So I'm letting you off easy. You do the groundwork and then you don't have to do anything else. So no, it doesn't. The short answer is no, it doesn't have to be our time frame of 3 weeks. You know, you may have a student that works on a project for an entire year. So it can be that type of thing, or you may have an experiment that a student does, like some of your physics experiments or engineering, you know, they happen fast, or chemistry, you know, but it's just replicating it and then changing it. So it depends. But
That's
no,
a great question, though, Karen, about feasibility, because that is a conversation you'll probably end up having with your students.
right. And that goes back to that timeline that we talked about, of looking at when you want to wrap this up and then moving back when you're working with your students. But since you don't have to really produce anything other than the research plan will be your assignment next week, that's as far as we're going to go with you.
All right. Well, if you all think of any additional questions, you can feel free to reach out to any of the three of us. I will, if you did not sign in yet, please do, because that's what I'm going to use to send the follow-up email with. It will include both slide decks and that worksheet to help you come up with your testable question for next week. So feel free. I will include all three of us on the email so that you can reach out to any one of us. All right.